recognize our government leaders participating in today's forum. From the Connecticut General Assembly, Speaker of the House Jim Amon from Milford. Senate Majority Leader Martin Looney from New Haven. Representative Mike Lawler from East Haven, House Chair of the Judiciary Committee. Senator John Kissel from Enfield, the Senate ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. And Representative Bill Dyson from New Haven, now our longest-serving legislator and perhaps the first voice in state government to call for new strategies to promote the successful transition of formerly incarcerated individuals back into society. From the Judicial Branch, William Carbone, Executive Director of the Court Support Services Division. From the Executive Branch, Mary Ann O'Neill, a counsel in Governor Rell's office. Therese Lance, Commissioner of the Department of Correction. Robert Farr, Chair of the Board of Pardons and Paroles and Chair of the Connecticut Sentencing Task Force. And Brian Austin, OPM Undersecretary for the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division. I'd also like to recognize the many members of the audience who work every day on the front lines of the criminal justice system, including probation, parole, corrections, and the nonprofits. At this point, it's my honor to introduce for his remarks the esteemed Speaker of the Connecticut House of Representatives, the Honorable James Amon of Milford. First elected to the House in 1990, Jim Amon is now serving his second term as Speaker. Highly respected by his colleagues and his community, his legislative accomplishments span all significant areas of state public policy, from children's health care to the needs of veterans, from energy and environmental reforms to transportation and fiscal policy. In 2000 alone, Speaker Amon's efforts were recognized and honored by organizations as diverse as the Connecticut Housing Coalition, the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce, the Connecticut Autism Spectrum Resource Center, and the National Children's Alliance for Advocacy of Child Abuse Prevention. We here at CCSU know him as a great friend of public higher education, and we welcome him warmly to this campus and to this conference. So, Speaker Amon.
Well, good morning. Are you awake yet? I noticed a lot of legislators aren't here except for, of course, Representative Bill Dyson's here. That's good news, but I think a lot of the guys from New Haven might have got caught in some of the same traffic that I got caught up, so I'm sure they'll be here soon. I wish somebody would do something about this transportation problem, right? Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I think it's going to be a very exciting day. I won't be able to stay, but thank God we have this on video. Hopefully we'll see it on CTN or somewhere. We'll be able to review it later. I'm looking forward to see and to hear the voices of many people that are experts in this field and to share ideas. I really would like to thank Steve and, of course, commend the university for organizing this very timely and important forum. You know, ever since the horrific Chester tragedies this summer, criminal justice reforms have been and should be on the lips and the minds of people at the Capitol, but also everyone in our state should be concerned. Next week, the 22nd on Tuesday, the General Assembly will convene in a special session to vote on legislation that we hope, and we really do hope, will preclude another Cheshire from happening again, ever. Our legislative session will conclude months of deliberation, bill drafting, calling up proposals, and numerous opportunities for the public's will to be heard. The process has not just revealed the emotion behind criminal justice reform, but its complexity. Things that I think most legislators didn't even understand about communications, sometimes the lack of communication between departments, how far we are behind on our IT, our data processing, and all of our intelligence gathering. And certainly, finally, as someone had said earlier, Representative Bill Dyson, who has been an advocate and a fighter for years, that we are finally listening that reentry is something that is a must to keep our society safe and also to offer opportunities to individuals that certainly need our cooperation and allowing them to have a good and fruitful life in society. There's no doubt that many residents and the citizens have demanded action in reaction to Cheshire. It certainly is now time for the legislature to do its part. And this is no time for political grandstanding, and I can tell you that for the most part, thank God, Democrats and Republicans have put down their labels and tried to come up with solutions that are sustainable and are correct. For the political posturing and those who do, all of you should call them out. That's not what we need in this situation to move forward. The agenda that you'll see and we'll be debating on Tuesday will be heavy on law and order, with the emphasis on laws already on the books, such as the persistent offender laws. We're talking also about making home invasions violent crimes and adding tools for law enforcement agencies to better communicate with one another. And the Cheshire home invasion foremost was a personal tragedy, as we know, for the Pettit family. And I want to point out that as tragic as that was, and as all of us feel the pain of Mr. Pettit, we also must recognize that this isn't the only time a tragedy like this has happened. In many communities across our state, whether they be white community of influence and affluence, or in our minority populations, this is not uncommon. And we as a society have to understand that we must address these issues equally if we're to do justice to our citizens, no matter who they are and where they come from. Second, it is also a very painful and chilling reminder that our system of reentry is in dire need of innovation. Absolutely, I have to have creative ideas and partnerships. You don't mind, I'm just take a little sip of this so I can get through the little speech. It's not the same stuff Johnny Carson used to drink. This is ginger tea, so some people might not believe that, but that's okay. If you do not give someone who is incarcerated the tools, the structure and supervision needed to get back into society, that person is doomed to fall back on behaviors that are familiar and dangerous. If you don't have an opportunity out of jail and out of prison, and some of the individuals you'll be hearing from later today that I've listened to, members of my own caucus yesterday, then they have to survive. And when you put someone in a survival mode, what do you think they're going to do? People who have to survive will do anything it takes to survive. And if they don't have an opportunity for a job, if they don't have a job opportunity for education, They don't have an opportunity to put a roof over their head. They don't have an opportunity to get substance abuse and alcohol rehabilitation. Then we know what happens. You're the experts in this room, many of you. You know better than I. Society has to understand, it's not just about locking up somebody and throwing away the key. That's not how a democracy works and our society works. We have to understand that prevention's important, and education's important, and these things must always be on the foremost on the minds of our legislators that want to sound tough on crime, but in reality do nothing. Also, you know, in the case that a person's failure is shared by the system that allowed it, and right now, Connecticut, that's our system. No one, none of us can predict the certainty of the future behavior of individuals returning to society from incarceration. We can assess risks based on good information and past behaviors and direct resources and consequences accordingly. But however, re-entry without structure or forethought is a recipe for disaster and doomed to failure. I've learned more in the last 5 months on re-entry programs than I have in my whole 25 years in politics. So I applaud CCSU by the way of this forum for hitting on the questions of what happens next after we get tough with the laws. But tough, I think we all want to have good laws and be protected and public safety. But are we really going to do something to change the system to make it better? Inmates in Connecticut serve a greater percentage of their sentences than virtually anywhere else. Some of the worst will never again see the light of day, and I think most of us in any community, that's rightly so. Nobody wants a dangerous individual in their neighborhood that they know is going to probably repeat a crime. But if the statistics are to be believed, that they will leave prison reading at a 4th grade level, many times with substance abuse or alcohol problems, whether it be drugs, I should say too. So we must understand that individual that's being released back into society, what do we do with them? How can we make them a member of society again and make what they do to actually give back to society and be a working member of society. So moving forward, the test will be if we can become as good at making sure inmates successfully re-enter society as we are as locking them up. Many legislators, as we have political years, we're so proud of saying we're tough on crime. I say that again, locking prisoners up. I hope the day will come where we can stand with many of the individuals in this room that were in prison, are now members of society and doing well, that we're as proud, if not prouder, that we are a society that makes sure that our prison population, that when they get out, that they can find a job, they can find an opportunity, they can feed their family, they can put shelter above their family and themselves. That's what we should all be proud of and be striving for, because someday they're going to get out of prison, and certainly we want to give all those opportunities to these individuals. So today's program will begin to help us develop solutions for reentry, and I hope you'll share that information from today with all the legislators. Continue to educate us, because we need to be educated on your expertise so we can benefit and write the proper laws from your experiences and insights. I thank you so much for being such a nice audience and quiet. And again, I'll be at your anytime you need me at the Capitol. I talked to Steve this morning from Reentry Program. I called you a little while ago on the way up. I want to meet, talk to you. This is the year for reentry. So all of you out there that have been waiting for the time, there's no better time. The legislature's listening. You finally have come to the top of the hill, and we see you. We're listening to you. So let's make this a great year for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. As Speaker of the House, your input is clearly critical to our discussions in the policymaking process. It's now my pleasure to introduce the director and the heart and soul of the Institute for the Study of Crime and Justice, Andrew Clark. Andrew came to CCSU to head the Institute for the Study of Crime and Justice in the summer of 2005. In the short time that Andrew's been here, he's worked tirelessly and passionately, and I'm sure he's worked that way with all of you, to bring multiple opportunities for our faculty and students to work collaboratively with the state legislature, judicial and executive branches in the research, development, implementation, and evaluation of public policy initiatives in the criminal justice field. Due in large part to Andrew's effective leadership and efforts in his collaboration with our Criminal Justice Department, and particularly Dr. Stephen Cox, Chair of the Criminology and Criminal Justice Department. Andrew has significantly grown the ISCJ, and it's fast become recognized as a valuable go-to resource by policymakers and stakeholders in the field. Andrew is also a member of the Connecticut Sentencing Task Force, and last August he was appointed as director of CCSU's Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy, a co-sponsor of this conference. So I'm delighted to turn the podium over to Andrew Clark.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see so many of you here today and so many familiar faces and friendly faces. I also welcome all of you here today to what I hope will be an informative, engaging, and ultimately rewarding forum on an issue that is foremost in the mind of many Connecticut residents, as the speaker mentioned, the criminal justice system, and in particular prisoner reentry. So why here? Why are we at CCSU? Well, there's a bit of a story to it. In January 2002, at a CCSU conference addressing education and training in the face of critical state labor shortages, State Representative Bill Dyson challenged the university to go a big step further and use its resources to work with him to develop a series of forums to examine the issues surrounding the reinvestment of criminal justice dollars in job development and job placement for formerly incarcerated individuals who were returning to and residing in our neighborhoods. CCSU responded, and the first Building Bridges Conference was held here just over 5 years ago today. It was a collaboration between the Governor William A. O'Neill Endowed Chair, the Connecticut Department of Labor, the Connecticut General Assembly, and judicial and executive branches of state government, as well as the nonprofit stakeholders in the criminal justice field. In 2006, a relatively new Institute for the Study of Crime and Justice took the lead in CCSU for Building Bridges 2 and does so again for Building Bridges 3. In addition to coordinating forums such as these, the ISCJ utilizes the skills and knowledge of expert faculty, staff, and bright and eager student research assistants to provide a wide range of information, training, research, program evaluation, and consulting services to the greater community outside of the university. And since over 86% of CCSU graduates remain in Connecticut, we look to our student body to cultivate the next generation of Connecticut's public leaders and policymakers. One of the best ways to accomplish this is through our criminal justice students' participation in one or more of many public service programs and projects I've described. These activities are not only empowering, but demonstrate to students firsthand what the late Governor Bill O'Neill has often said, that public service is indeed a noble calling, where you can make a real positive and measurable difference in the quality of people's lives. It is our intent that our criminal justice majors utilize this experiential learning as integral members of the community, as professionals in the criminal justice system or otherwise. And so we are gathered here today to both reflect on our progress and to explore new and innovative ways to facilitate successful community reintegration, reduce recidivism, and enhance public safety in our communities. Of late, much has been said about what is wrong with our criminal justice system here in Connecticut. Indeed, it is crucial to address any flaws in our system that would lead to the inappropriate release of dangerous individuals. Yet, as the statewide initiatives to reduce recidivism emanating from Building Bridges 1 and 2 have demonstrated, it is also imperative to continue to develop, implement, and evaluate community-based supervision, treatment, educational, and employment training to help formerly incarcerated individuals get on track and lead productive lives. These kinds of well-considered efforts effectively promote what is arguably everybody's primary goal, public safety. That is in the short term. We should also look to reinvest in those communities from which many of these individuals come from in order to address the long-term solution to Connecticut's prison overcrowding issue, creating rewarding opportunities for our citizens so that they are not inclined to become involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. I would like to underscore our role as a state university in this collaboration. We conduct academic research, provide evidence-based best practices, and state-of-the-art program evaluations which are data-driven to inform decisions on targeting funds and developing sound public policies that truly achieve our goals and objectives. And there are many of you in the audience today that are on the front lines of developing these best practices. Through your professionalism and passion, you help to inform us as to what works and what does not. This leads me to the critical message I would like to begin this conference with, and it is this. If there is one certainty, it is that uninformed policies will foster unintended consequences that can be extremely costly to all of us in the long run. We know this and have learned this lesson in the past. So let us inform and be informed. Let us do our best today to capitalize on the abundant resources gathered here from many aspects of the criminal justice system. We are the professionals of the system. We do not derive our opinion from a few moments or even days of thought. No, we live and breathe, striving to do our best, day in and day out, in what is one of the most difficult systems to operate. We are police officers, judges, prosecutors, and public defenders, correctional staff, parole and probation officers, nonprofit providers, advocates, agency heads, and policymakers. Let us strive to make our voice heard in these trying times. Let us inform so that we can ensure the best possible outcomes for all the citizens of Connecticut. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our first presentation, Reentry Statistics, What Works? An overview of Connecticut's Statistical Analysis Center's recidivism and prison population reports. Dr. Stephen Cox is a professor and chair of the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and he has been an integral part of the ISCJ since its inception. The ISCJ collaborates closely with our Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice to serve as a nonpartisan academic resource to state and local government. Dr. Cox has been a lead researcher for the ISCJ on many projects involving a significant part of the criminal justice system in Connecticut. He is currently involved in evaluating 4 pilot probation projects for the Judicial Branch's Court Support Services Division, as well as a host of additional programs in other state agencies. Dr. Cox is also director of the Connecticut Statistical Analysis Center, a collaborative venture between the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice and the Office of Policy and Management that is housed in the ISCJ. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce and call upon Dr. Stephen Cox.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning and welcome to CCSU. This is a very exciting day for us in our program to know that we're an integral part of what's going on in the criminal justice policy and planning across the system. I just want to highlight quickly the role of the Statistical Analysis Center. As Andrew said, this is a joint venture between us and the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division within the Office of Policy and Management, and our role is to work with them to produce 2 of the more prominent reports on the criminal justice system. One is the offender recidivism study. The other one is the prison population forecasting study, or the prison population projection study. And what I want to talk about today is kind of go over the prison population projections and how it does relate to reentry and how it does clearly relate to what we are here to talk about today. 2 years ago, we were extremely optimistic at the last Building Bridges conference. We were talking about jobs and employment programs for offenders. We were talking about enhancing mental health services and substance abuse programs. Last year, we were still pretty optimistic across the board the Department of Correction had significantly enhanced the number of halfway house beds across the state. CSSD, Court Support Services Division, had implemented several pilot programs aimed at reentry and keeping people from returning to court and prison. The Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services had been an integral part of these discussions, and so we're pretty optimistic about where we were going. And our prison population forecast pretty much reflected that if we kept everything going the way it is, we could expect the prison population to remain relatively stable, which is what one of the main goals of a lot of this discussion was. And then, of course, as we all know, and as Representative Amon, or Speaker Amon said, that significant events truly change our criminal justice system, and maybe our system more than anyone else's. And we all know what happened in July, and we're all dealing with the ramifications of the tragic incident in Cheshire. And so unfortunately, I don't hear the same optimism across the state that I heard a year ago and 2 years ago. Instead of talking about reentry programs and how we should do more of it, the emphasis seems to be more on law and order and control and pulling people back rather than working with them closely to keep them out and keep them successful in the community. I'm sitting here as a policy analyst today, hopefully not to paint the doom and gloom picture of what could happen if we totally forget about all the reentry initiatives that we started 4 and 5 years ago. What this is the first part of the graph is the prison population over the last 20 years. You can see there's been a steady increase from 1985 up and through really actually 2003, 2004, when the state really started looking carefully at the reentry initiatives and the reentry issues and how it related to the prison population. And we've leveled off over the last few years, and now we're at the crossroads. This is last year's projection. We are very optimistic. The bottom line, and I'm not used to being tethered to a podium, I'm used to being able to walk around. The bottom line is the best case scenario. If everything remained the same, we could expect the prison population to pretty much remain stable. The middle line was less optimistic, but more the reality. Based on the previous trends over the last 20 years, this is pretty much what we can expect it to go up, but not nearly as much as it may. And then the top line, that's what I commonly refer to as the doom and gloom projection. If something significant happened in this state where we forgot about reentry, reduced funding levels, restricted those folks who could leave prison and not be sentenced to jail, we may expect a significant increase in the prison population up into 2012, to where we could be looking at having to build a couple more prisons. And I say optimistic, going back to last year's discussion, when I would say we may need to build a couple more prisons if something happens. The attitude pretty much was, that's not even on the table, no one's going to talk about that, that's not something the state's interested in. However, this year, as you notice, that is back on the table, and even though we're here to talk about reentry, there are a couple proposals out there that talk about building new facilities. So we clearly are at a crossroads with where we're going to go from here as far as reentry goes. Now, in 1974, Robert Martinson produced a pretty controversial study. Even to this day, it's pretty controversial. And his conclusion was nothing works in correctional rehabilitation, so why bother? We just need to lock people up and forget about it because we know that nothing's possibly going to work. Well, I definitely don't want to start this forum off on such a sour and gloomy note, and I want to highlight one of those things that we know has worked in this state. And I mentioned in 2004 with Public Act 04234, there's been quite a few pilots out there. And fortunately, we've been lucky enough to be involved in many of these pilots and evaluating them. And so I want to talk just about one of those, and that's the Court Support Services Division Probation Transition Program and Technical Violations Unit. I was fortunate enough to work with CSSD in evaluating these two programs, and now we have a lot of good data to talk about this. And while I'm simply highlighting these two, we can talk about all the pilots and their evaluations because there are several of them out there, and I think we'll see somewhat similar results across the board, which should encourage us to continue the reentry initiatives and to keep looking at what works and focus on that. And with these two programs, especially the Probation Transition Program, this program was set up to help people leaving prison, going to probation, what we all call split sentence probationers, help them remain successful in the community and keep them from returning to prison with a new offense or a technical violation. just to give you just the way this program was different, and both of these programs are different than programs in the past. The highlight was the probation officer was the catalyst of change with the offender. Their job wasn't to simply oversee them, micromanage them, monitor them, and violate them at every chance they got. It was to work with them, help them figure out what problems they do have coming out of prison, and work to resolve that. And to do that, the caseloads were significantly dropped to 25, but also there was a true enhancement of services. And this, let me tell you at the top, I'm somewhat of a pessimist when it comes to program evaluations because we all throws out these buzzwords, enhanced services, change, help the inmate, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. I say that from many years of experience evaluating these types of programs, but I can honestly say that happened. CSSD was truly committed to enhancing services across the board for these very high-risk, high-needs probationers, including mental health services, including substance abuse, including education, employment, and in some cases, the probation officers helping find housing. And so the results, so what were the results of this? And this is just in a nutshell. It's hard for me not to spend an hour and a half being a college professor talking about statistics, but I want to make sure everyone's awake for our next speaker. And I just want to end on this. This is the results 2 years out. This is what we found. The comparison group was a similar group of probationers that went through, that were released from prison before these programs started. So we were able to compare people in these programs to people who should have been in these programs if they were around in 2002, 2004. And so what we found is the bottom number is the important one, the violation rates across the board. 80%, and I was pretty shocked. We read all the studies. We all know that anywhere from 50 to 70% of people leaving prison have a very good chance of going back. I was a little surprised at 80%, but this is the highest risk group of probationers that are coming out of prison. That's why judges were, had the foresight to sentence them to a probation term outside of prison to guarantee there's some community supervision. And so what we found is that 80% of the comparison group were violated, and about 60% ended up being resentenced to prison, which is, everybody would admit is pretty high. The PTP group, the probation transition group, about 50% were violated, but what's the number? 25%, around 25% actually were resentenced to prison. So that's extremely significant. These numbers still may seem high, 1 in 4, but compared to national research and national statistics, that number is astounding. The 25% is the group that was resentenced to prison. And even a technical violations unit, these were people who were on the verge of being violated with a good chance of them being sentenced to jail or prison. And so to think, instead of 100% of people who were being technically 100% of the probationers who would probably be technically violated, they were given a second chance. And so this is a group that's had, not just one issue, but one issue after another after another. And so they were placed in this special unit, given the same special attention the probation transition group was. And so we saw pretty good results. 68% is high, but when you compare that to the likelihood that a lot more than that, and possibly close to 100% probably would have been violated, I think that's a success as well. We shouldn't hang our hats on these findings, but I present these in light that it is encouraging, that the stuff we're doing is working. We just need to keep doing this and do more and keep looking at what works and investing in that, as opposed to the alternative, which is build those 2 or 3 new prisons somewhere probably in northern or northeastern Connecticut and forget about these types of programs. So I promised Andrew I'd keep my time short, and I will. So thank you very much, and hopefully this will be a very productive day, and we can continue this conversation that we started in the first Building Bridges Conference and that we've extended into the second Building Bridges Conference. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. I also want to indicate that, we say we're evidence-based and we're looking for evidence-based practices, and we want to do best practices. And the last conference we had evaluation forms that we sent out to folks, and they filled them out. And just to show that we practice what we preach, we listened to them. And one of the things that folks said was that they'd rather not have these things every couple of years or very sporadically. So what we're doing now, starting this year, is try to have a few more of these conversations, have them be more detailed and more specific, and what we're intending is sometime in the late spring to have a forum addressing some of the evaluations that we've been doing on a number of the reentry programs. In more particular, it probably will be a lot more informative, and there'll be questions and answers and whatnot. But I'd now like to introduce the keynote speaker of the event, who I had the pleasure of meeting and last night when I picked him up from the airport after he had been delayed at Bradley. I think it was about midnight, and then we shared a conversation. And I could tell you he's a very dedicated individual, because he wanted to talk about what was going on in Connecticut, and we were talking till about 1 in the morning on it, and still talking about it when I picked him up at about, I think, 7 o'clock this morning. So a very dedicated individual, and I'm very happy to have him here. I hadn't met him before. It was the Council of State Governments, which has its pulse on what's going on nationally around these issues, that let us know at CCSU that he would be a good person to address our crowd, and so I'm happy to do so, that we were able to bring him here. Dennis Schrantz is the Deputy Director for the Planning and Community Development Administration and coordinator of the, or former coordinator of the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative. And I'd just like to point out at this point too, in your packets, in your conference packets, there's bios from Dennis, and also all the other panelists, and some articles that he wrote as well. As Deputy Director, Dennis is responsible for collaborative efforts with the department's executive policy team to develop and implement a 5-year plan to control prison growth and manage the department's prisoner reentry initiative. This administration is also responsible for implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the Michigan Community Corrections Act, which intends to reduce prison admissions and address issues regarding jail overcrowding. Mr. Schrantz's specialty areas are in jail and prison crowding, cross-system integration between substance abuse and criminal justice systems, and the reduction of racial disparity. Prior to his current role, he was the Deputy Director of Field Operations Administration at the Michigan DOC, where he was responsible for the oversight of the department's probation, parole, and boot camp operations and policy development. He was formerly the Director of the Adult Services Division of Wayne County in the Michigan Department of Community Justice, which is responsible for the oversight of $12 million in community corrections programs, policy development, implementation, and cross-system collaboration. Mr. Schrantz has also served as the Executive Director of the Michigan Office of Community. During his tenure, prison admission rates were reduced from 32% to 22%, and the utilization of local jails improved dramatically. The Michigan approach was described as policy-driven, data-informed decision-making in an article on the 5 principles of effective community corrections published by the American Correctional Association. Mr. Schrantz has also been administrator at the North Carolina Community Penalties Program and the Repay Program in Hickory, North Carolina. In addition, Mr. Schrantz has been a consultant with the Center for Substance Abuse, the National Institutes of Correction and Justice, Center for Effective Public Policy, and the Sentencing Project. He has published articles and taught seminars on effective targeting of prison-bound offenders and reducing racial disparity in the justice system. He is also co-author of the Sentencing Project Manual, Reducing Racial Disparity in the Criminal Justice System, a manual for practitioners and policymakers. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome up Dennis Schrantz.
Certainly is the case that no matter where you are in the country that is focusing on reentry, which practically 50–60% of all the states in the country are now doing so, that there has been a tragic event of one kind or another that pauses the forward progress, where folks have to take a very deliberate view of their implementation efforts to determine whether or not things can be improved. And of course, they always can. I want to talk today a little bit about what Michigan is doing in prisoner reentry to provide some context, and then talk a bit about what it takes to move beyond these types of tragic events in our experience. And frankly, there's quite a few differences between Michigan and Connecticut, but at the same time, there's a great number of similarities. So I hope those points will come across. I want to make sure that I've got time for some interaction with you, and I have a tendency to talk. I have a 4-hour presentation prepared, so we'll try to cut that a little short. Andrew's job is to give me this at 10 minutes and then come up and grab me at 5 to make sure we at least have some time for some interaction. In Michigan, the vision for prisoner reentry is very simple. It's that every prisoner released to the community will have the tools needed for success. And the focus is on every prisoner, not just the nonviolent prisoners that have often been the focus of criminal justice policy. For example, on the front end in community corrections, we see in Michigan and other states a near total focus on non-assaultive offenders, which has always raised kind of the question about why we're not working with the violent offenders, since those are the ones that we probably really need to be more afraid of and probably need, as we know, a great deal more attention than the nonviolent folks. But in prisoner reentry, we're focusing very clearly in Michigan, and I believe here as well, on what the research tells us we should focus on, which is the moderate and the higher risk offender, because research tells us if you focus on the lower offender, you may actually exacerbate the propensity to fall back into crime, because there are so many hoops to jump through that they may fail in those hoops, and the potential for technical violations increases, and you end up turning the goals of the project or initiative on its head. I think we've learned a lot in the community corrections effort, and we're applying that to prisoner reentry, which actually is a much clearer and cleaner way to reduce the reliance on incarceration, because while it's certainly true that it's better to have offenders who are in need of drug treatment to never go into the prison system, because they go in as addicts, they come out as addicts, they go in unemployed, and 100% of them come out unemployed, and you can really work on those things only if they're in the community. At the same time, community corrections is much more difficult, because if you're trying to reduce prison populations on the front end, you have to figure out who's going to go and target offenders accordingly, and we actually don't know who will go. And if only 25–50% of certain types of offenders go to the prison system and we target them all for community corrections, at best only 1 out of 2 will be actually diverted from prison. And research shows that many times the folks that get into community corrections are those who weren't going to go in the first place, and so prison populations continue to grow. Folks who thought were going to go to prison are doubled up with types of conditions that they fail, and in fact prison populations can rise. On the other side, on reentry on the back end, every person who is in prison obviously fills a bed, so when they get out and don't come back, you save a bed. It's one-on-one. And so the dedication to reentry as a population control process and mechanism is extremely well-founded. And your efforts here to do that have obviously paid off. It's heartening to see this type of projection where we see in every state in the country, all prison population projections look like this. And occasionally you'll see a little dip, and that dip is often a little difficult to explain. And I know here is the subject of some evaluation, which I'm certain from talking to folks will be at least partly related to your successful efforts at reentry. But we understand that if we don't continue to dedicate efforts at this and basically do everything that we possibly can to try to get at this issue, that rise in the prison population will do what it always does and what it always will do, which is it will continue to climb. And it isn't about doing one thing, it's about doing, frankly, everything. The mission of our reentry initiative in Michigan is a little bit harder to remember than the vision. In fact, I have to read it. It is to reduce crime by implementing a seamless plan of supervision and services developed with every offender, delivered through a state and local collaboration from the time of entry to prison through their transition, their reintegration, and finally their aftercare in the community. I could probably talk for about 2 hours just on that mission, because it's very pregnant with a lot of the concepts and dedications to policy that we must have in order for this approach to be successful. We are very clear in the beginning, and it is an essential part of our message, that what we hope to accomplish through reentry is a reduction in crime, certainly not an elimination in crime. In Michigan, we've been very successful with our efforts. We had do have a governor, Governor Jennifer Granholm, who ran her campaign for governor with a plank in her platform to improve former prisoners' success based on cost and impacts on family. And so we had the benefit of strong visionary policy and political leadership to set the stage. And we began immediately working with her entire cabinet on the reentry idea and philosophy, because we all are clear that it is not a corrections issue. In fact, corrections can do very little about it, frankly, without the help of all of the other departments in state government, and clearly the crime fighters and the service providers in the local level. But with that political and policy leadership, we were able to implement and fund very quickly. We interestingly closed a prison to fund the first year of reentry during the planning stage for reentry, which took 2 years, the governor's first 2 years in office. We also produced a 5-year plan to control prison growth and created, for the first time in the Department of Corrections, an administration of planning, which some find a little funny, actually. Departments of Correction historically have not been famous for their planning. They can project quite well, but planning their way out of it is a phenomenon, I think, that has really taken shape across the country in the past 10 years, probably. But with this ability to move quickly and to have funding and to do what we've all here in Connecticut, and you're one of the first and foremost states in the country that have approached this justice reinvestment with the Council of State Governments, which I think has done a fabulous job here with all of the work that you've done. We're able to fund reentry in a meaningful way, because clearly it's about services and enhanced supervision, and that stuff costs money. The approach that we took is to develop a model which has some very difficult policy recommendations in it, and more specific activities to enact those policy recommendations, which total well over 100 in number, and quite clearly will take us well over 10 years to implement. We've been at it 5 years, and so far our numbers are good. We've worked with going on about 8,000 prisoners. We're doing pretty robust studies of their return to prison as the primary evidence of success or failure, and we found that our rather egregious failure rate that had 2 out of every 4 prisoners returning back to prison within 4 years has so far been cut in half, so that now only 1 out of every 4 prisoners that we've been working with are returning to prison. And that evidence, of course, has been able to support that political will that is there and that vision that is there, fueling it with evidence that this stuff pays off, and it frankly is worth the political risk to do this work. And the ability for partnerships with academic partners and community partners and partners of all kinds and stripes is critical to that, so that all of the decision makers in the state understand that this is a very unified process and there are very, very few downsides. We often ask the question when we did public education going around the state, particularly when we were in front of what we might have predicted would be a hostile crowd, which is to say almost every presentation that we gave, that we simply asked the question, who here is in favor of increased crime? And no one would raise their hand. Who here is in favor of reducing crime? And everyone would raise their hand. And we'd say, great, because you must support prisoner reentry, because that's our primary goal. And in the entire 5 years that we've been doing this work, we have never had one public official ever talk negatively about our approach, even when we have had egregious incidents similar to the events that have taken place here. These tragedies are absolutely predictable. In fact, one of our public education messages that we created and used during the 2-year planning stage was this: you can count on a tragedy. It will happen. And it will be one of the people we're working with, because we're not going to eliminate crime. We're going to reduce it. So when that happens, know that we told you it would happen. And with that repetitious, constant messaging to the public, working with the community representatives and the real groups of folks that run the local criminal justice system, the prosecutors, the chiefs of police, the parole officers, with them understanding that when in fact these events happen, they said, yes, we knew this would happen. This is why we need to continue this work. This is not a reason to stop it. I will tell you, one of the most difficult parts of a job like mine, and a job like many folks here, is going to legislative sessions and testifying. And it might actually, I like to think it would be easier here than it is in Michigan, because it is very tough in Michigan. But I recall that the day that we were to appear to the Republican, my boss is a Democrat, and we were to appear before the Republican-controlled Senate Judiciary Committee and give our first presentation on reentry and what our plans were. And it was a ballyhooed event, and we, had a lot of good folks lined up to be able to deliver the message. And I woke up, typically before dawn, and was a little bit nervous that morning, and went and got the newspaper and opened up the newspaper, and of course, what was there? What was there? Parolee shoots a police officer, puts him in the trunk of his car, and rides around until he gets caught. Front page. In a community where one of the legislators was from. I went to the hearing. I scoured the newsletter that we get on the hearings and hoped to God that it had been canceled. Prayed for snow, thunderstorms of all kinds. Hope I fell down and broke my leg. Tried to. It didn't quite work. Ended up going to the hearing, and we had these pretty prominent local folks who were going to testify, including a former legislator, a Republican, who I was pretty clear about what his message was. He was in the county government at the time. His name was Don Gilmer, a wonderful man. And I said to Don, I said, I want to change the order here of the lineup. I don't want to go first. I wonder if you would. And I thought if I did that with the 7 or 8 people, I might not ever have to actually testify. And I noted with great glee that the Republican staffer had very nicely put the headline in front of every single person on the committee. And I thought, well, we'll see how this goes. Don Gilmer got up, and I almost fell off my chair, because he reached into his briefcase and he pulled out the newspaper and he held it up, and then he said to the committee, this is why we have to have prisoner reentry. This is a predictable event. These people need help. And he talked about the man's employment record, his drug addiction, and that was one of the best hearings we ever had. And in fact, I did go last, and I had to say very little. But it points out the key message that we need to deliver to everyone, particularly the policymakers. This is not a panacea. This is difficult work. It's always interesting to me when we have an egregious event and the blame game starts, and the first thing you know is parole agents are being investigated and the Department of Corrections is being held accountable. Certainly logical and, frankly, appropriate responses, but I'm yet to see a headline that says, tragic event, parents interviewed for where they fell short. City Council asked about poor employment possibilities for returning prisoners. Drug addiction service agencies questioned. And we all know that that's what it's about. Every single one of us have known this for 15, 20 years. But in that political process, it's very critical that folks feel that they are asking for and demanding in these cases accountability. And it's very, very important to be able to provide it. Our delivery system in Michigan is not unlike what you're doing here. We have community sites where we have reentry steering teams. They have transition agencies that go into the prisons, interview the prisoner months and months before they get out, try to put together a reentry plan. Each of those communities has a steering team that has a chair of the warden from the local prison. And in Michigan, with 48 prisons, everybody has a local prison. One of the top managers from parole are sitting on that steering team. Then a community-based representative is the third co-chair, most likely a faith-based community representative. They create a comprehensive reentry plan that addresses the intent on how to work with all of the prisoners who will be returning to that community over the course of the next year, targeting the moderate to high risk, which tend to be about 60% of the offenders, and understanding that what we are doing is building on the successes we've had, and we try to focus in our messages to the public about the fact that we have actually been successful half the time with these former prisoners. It's easy and usual to talk about the failure rate. We can switch that quite readily. It happens to be the same number because it's 50% success. But we need to focus on that, and the fact that what we're doing is providing parole agents more tools to be able to do a better job with those folks that historically they perhaps have been less successful with, and they are probably the folks that are in need of multiple services, who have multiple needs, and have probably been incarcerated and failed on parole several times. That would be just several times, I guess. In the state, because of the governor's leadership and the bipartisan support in the legislature, we've been able to enact a justice reinvestment approach where we have closed an astounding 12 facilities in the past 4 years, saved over $450 million in expected costs, thank you, and reinvested only a small percentage of that in reentry, which has grown from zero funding to $12 million to $20 million, and for fiscal year 2009, we'll enjoy a $30 million funding, which in the state of Michigan, with about 17,000 parolees, 50,000 prisoners, $2 billion budget, et cetera, is a formidable amount of money, but these comparisons often get lost a little bit when you're looking at states of different sizes. But still, it is an incredible amount of money. We are now statewide. We have reentry presence in every single county in the state. We're able to achieve that within 5 years, and we're taking the effort completely up to scale beginning in 2009, so that 100% of the offenders coming into prison will be assessed for their reentry needs, beginning with their prison stay, which is the first phase of the effort, and leading to a very robust second phase, which is the reentry planning phase, where the community folks come in and really do the lion's share of the work to get these reentry plans produced. There's an article that Andrew mentioned that I wrote that was published in one of the ACA publications, and this is a big sports state. UConn's one of the powerhouses in basketball, and we love our teams. I'm actually an MSU fan, Michigan State University. If you know anything about Michigan, you know that our hated rival is U of M. Well, you'll see there that for some reason ACA put the maize and blue sign, U of M, as a logo on the article that I wrote, and you have no idea how much heat I took for that. And I'm using valuable time to tell you stories you really probably don't care about at all. Obviously, this viewpoint that you have in Connecticut that we share with you in Michigan to take a comprehensive approach is the way to go. And we know, of course, that prison populations are driven by some very simple factors. How many come in compared to how many go out, accounting for how long they stay. And so while we can do Herculean efforts on the back end and affect in our state, which is indeterminate sensing, how long they stay, and the failure rate, which has gone down very well, we at the same time have to understand that on the front end, you have abilities and needs to control admissions through your work on probation and the stuff that Steve was talking about relative to probation violations and evidence-based practices, and actually used the word criminogenic. I thought that was great. I use that word sometimes, and people don't know what I mean, so you're a sophisticated bunch. All that stuff is critical, and sentencing reform is critical as well. We've always got to take a look at those things if we're to have a comprehensive view, and it seems like that's what you're doing. I'll tell you about these terrible events that take place, and to let you know that you're not alone here, and in fact, when they happen, the system self-adjusts. When a tragic event takes place, the system self-adjusts, and everybody who is making decisions about what to do with these people that are breaking the law become more concerned, more conservative, and every decision maker from the beginning of the system to the end of the system get tougher, harder. The charges are different, the pleas are different, pretrial decisions are different, bail decisions are different, sentencing decisions, parole supervision, revocations, returns to prison, prison populations will always expand after an event, and the question is the state sophisticated enough to take hold of that and get it to level off, because we cannot create criminal justice policy based on tragedies. That's right. When the Speaker talks about, very candidly and subtly, I thought, about how these events take place in communities all across the state every day, he certainly is telling the truth. And the message is this: this stuff happens. It will always happen. Whether it's top page or back page is going to be dependent on a lot of factors that I won't talk about right now, but I think you all are aware of racial disparities in the justice system, in the way the media reacts to these types of crimes in which communities. That's right. And it's a very, very difficult thing to talk about, and you got to talk about it. That's right. And I think I've seen tremendous leadership here in the state, honesty and forthrightness, leadership from the governor in her incredibly smart decision to immediately pull together a bunch of smart folks and lock them in a room and say, tell us what we ought to do. These are some good ideas. Not all of them are great ideas, and not all of them, frankly, are even good ideas, but most of them are. And the question's going to be, which one of them will pass the legislature, and what are they going to cost you? Because several of them are going to cost you. Some of them could cost you dearly. And I know that you're dedicating your effort to analyze those, and you've got a great group of folks that can do that. Our head of our Department of Corrections, Patricia Caruso, our state is similar in that we have a woman governor, we have a woman head of Department of Corrections. In fact, I do nothing but report to women every day from the beginning of my day, and I love that. I truly do. I've learned a lot. I've learned not to talk about it, so let me move on. But we share this leadership, I think, from political and policy leaders that are vital, enthusiastic, fresh, and new, and are not afraid to say what needs to be said. And I suspect that we as a nation are moving toward such a high degree of diversity that it almost is becoming commonplace. And we don't have to look very far in the election issues to notice that. And I think we as a country and each of us as states have moved well in that direction. When the director came on, one of the reasons that the governor chose her was because she was, as is your director, I believe, a former warden, who we knew could stand unblinkingly before the press when the tragedy, predictable tragedy, would take place, and be able to explain with confidence how we were going to maintain public safety. Much to our chagrin, 10 days after she was seated in her post, an offender was released from prison through a clerical error that had miscalculated his release date. He went home and brutally murdered his entire family, nearly decapitating beautiful children. That was the week that the governor had announced a comprehensive plan to undertake criminal justice policies. And it was not slowed down by this tragic event, it was accelerated. Almost a year later, Another error, 10,000 releases a year. If we make a tragic error one time, who would be surprised? We released a man on error and he went out and he started a serial killing spree. He tortured and murdered a pregnant woman, tortured and murdered her husband. That event was on the front headlines of the papers for 38 days straight. Every media outlet in the state became our best friend, and they said to us, "We love you guys. You help us sell units." Awards were given that year for investigative reporting, and in the state of Michigan, all 3 top awards went on correction stories. And not one of those headlines said, "Tragic event occurs, parents investigated." What in heaven's name do folks expect when someone comes to our prison system, 24 years old, addicted, mentally ill? We have them for 2 or 3 years, they get out and they continue to be addicts, and they kill someone, and who do they blame? They blame us. We are the face of public accountability, and while it's not fair, it certainly is a reality. Now, Selapak and Daniels, these first tragic perpetrators, were not reentry graduates, so to speak. This happened much later. We put a lot of time and energy into public relations, and the governor agreed with some arm twisting to do what we thought would be a public service announcement, and she is as great as most politicians are, I think, on camera. We had a great interview with her, and we followed up her interview on camera with an interview of the perfect prisoner. This guy could really talk the talk, and he was great. He meant it. He'd been in and out about 3 or 4 times. Not violent, so we didn't want to take a chance, and put somebody up there that might go out and commit an act of violence. He was a drug addict. We had a conference, a national conference. We attracted 500 or 600 people. We had a nationally televised conference that some group put together with us, and thousands of people all over the country saw this clip. Well, the man got out of prison, and the next day he did some more crack cocaine, and he raped 2 women. You won't be seeing that clip. This stuff is predictable. About 7 months ago, a nonviolent offender who was a model prisoner was released from the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, had a good reentry plan, went, got a job, was doing the work, seemed to be, all records now indicate, a very good client. Certainly no one thought that he was capable of being a serial killer and brutally murdering 7 women. And yet that is what he is charged with. The newspaper article focused on the Prisoner Reentry Initiative because he was one of the graduates, and it said, and I quote, "No one can argue the success of this program," but apparently did not work for him. What a great understanding on the part of the media that this stuff is going to happen, and we cannot predict it, and we cannot control it. Safer communities, better neighborhoods, collaboration, partnerships, dedication to not just offenders but their families, driven by policy and political leadership. What a wonderful speech by the House Speaker. I had understood that we did not exactly know what the House Speaker would say, and he provided to you today the best speech that I've ever heard from somebody at his level anywhere, anytime. You were to be feeling very good about this. There's a lot more I could say. I think I'm going to be running out of time. Andrew didn't exactly do this, but he's kind of giving me a weird look with his eyes. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up for questions. How much time do we have, Andrew? About 10 minutes, and that doesn't matter that you're like a half hour behind schedule?
No, we're actually kind of back on, and we can move the questions and answers for the panel into the lunch.
Okay, great. So we got about 10 minutes. Anybody? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I know Mr. Dice, and my name is Charles Elbert. I'm a political science major from Southern Connecticut. Professor Cox, it's good to see you. I've been trying to get a hold of you for a long time.
He'll be returning that call tomorrow, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know, I want to commend him for what he said about collaboration with faith-based organizations. I know up in Boston there's an organization, there's a 10-point national foundation by Reverend Rivers III. He deals with gangbangers, he's out there in the street. I know a program in New Haven that had a spirituality piece. Now, don't get scared when we say spirituality. It's not about church. Oh, excuse me, I am an elder. One thing the program in New Haven had, they had a spiritual piece in their program. And when they got state funding, they had to take it out. I know criminologists, because I've taken a criminology course, I'm a political science major, they don't deal with the spirit of the individual. I say this because, and I may not get a chance to say this, I've dealt with people in my own program, I run my own program. I've seen an 82% success rate in the Village of Power. And one of the things that Schrantz says is that when you put spirituality in the program, it changes people. We need to be open to ideas of change. African Americans are spiritual people, had to be. We need to address that issue where you have to allow faith-based organizations to come into these programs and do what they do best. I know there's an issue about separation of church and state, okay? But when we look at that, let's not explode it. But if I have a program that's 82% success, and it has some aspect of spirituality, not preaching, not proselytizing, but it's working. Women in this program have come out of prison. The lady killed her husband. She's got a job today. She's productive today. Women are going to Stone Academy. And my wife, she teaches on the Village of Power. She teaches women how to sew. They're getting jobs. And one aspect of the program is the spiritual aspect, letting people understand who they are. And in the study that Mr. Cox did, which I like the study, because you know what it gave me? It gave me a database. It gave me a database into what to drive my program. Is that these ladies looked at themselves through their spiritual aspect. Senator Dyson has been there. He's seen the great work that they're doing down there. Crossroads picked me up. But the one program couldn't pick me up because the state told them, you can't have that aspect in your program.
May I comment?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I think that you're absolutely right about many things here. Because whether we talk about spirituality or we talk about ethics or we talk about building character, what we're really focusing on is we want people to take their time and to think about what they're doing before they make the decision, and we want them to think about the implications, the ripple effect of what they do. When we're providing cognitive-based training, what we're doing is we're teaching people to think better. And we want them to have an image in their head of the person they will harm besides themselves if they do this thing that is illegal. When we coupled in our Wayne County, our Detroit jail system, cognitive restructuring with a parenting class for men, we were surprised at first to see that the men who were in the parenting class with the cognitive restructuring did a much better job after the program ended. And it's because before they did the thing, they thought about their kid. And frankly, in corrections, I don't care what they think about or who they think about, whether it's their mother, it's their brother, it's their pastor, or it's the Lord Jesus Christ. It's good by me, as long as they don't do the thing. And so what we've seen coming out of the Bush administration, and you might guess I've been no big fan of the Bush administration from what I said so far, but that man has done more for reentry than any national leader in the history of this United States, by saying that we need to focus on reentry. And what he's done is he's tried to push at least the federal government in the arena of trying to figure out that tough question. When is it spiritual? When is it proselytizing? Where is that line between church and state? So I think you're correct in figuring out and wanting to figure out how to do that. So another question or so? Thank you, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I really like what you said today. There's one thing I got to address, though, what you said about the governor, when you said that she got people in the room after the Cheshire tragedy happened. The governor's reaction after the Cheshire tragedy happened was to get a group of public officials together. There were no community residents involved in the equation, no formerly incarcerated people involved in the equation, and I think it's important that public officials, including the governor, learn that we need a shift in the public safety paradigm, that we need to get community folks involved in the police and the communities.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point, and I suspect, and I don't know the makeup of the group that was put together, but I would guess that those folks were chosen partly because they did have some of the pulse of what was going on, and I'm not in a position to either defend or aggravate anything that's happened, but I think you're right about this. I think the other point I'd like to emphasize, though, is what you said about having former prisoners involved. And I think that is absolutely critical, because if we really want to figure out if we're doing a better job, we need to ask these people what do they need and what do they ask. Re-entry isn't all that, much more difficult. My friend Russ Marajan is here. I haven't seen Russ for 15 years. We were joking earlier that I seem to have gotten old. Russ said to me, back in the day, re-entry was we just pull up a chair and talk to a prisoner and say, so what is it that you need? It isn't much more different than that. If we want to evaluate, we got to look at the end users, and that's not just the offender, that's the offender family. One of the primary focal points that we need to look at, and I know there's some discussion over lunch about this here today that seems well placed, is that it's not just about the offender returning to the community and what the offender needs. It recognizes that the offender is returning to his family, immediate or extended. He's returning somewhere, and we ought to do a better job at knowing what they need and what they're going through, because an offender comes back and he or she needs mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment. We ought to know whether anybody else in that household is getting the same thing and have them go to the same place, because transportation is a big issue. And if we know, as research shows us, that family support is one of the two most important reasons that separates the successful former prisoner from the unsuccessful, the second being engagement in the human service system, then it behooves us to do a much better job at understanding that family, and that means that we have to talk to them. And we have to bring them into the fold. And it's not just about visitation. In fact, it isn't visitation at all. It's family reunification, dedication. And so if our efforts at service delivery have to be dedicated to that, then so do our planning efforts. We were fortunate to understand that during our planning stage. We had former prisoners with us. We had family members with us. We had advocates. The governor came into office after a governor that had not had a particularly inclusive process. So she did, when she campaigned, she talked about setting a big table. Our first reentry planning meeting, we had 150 people there. It was a mess. But boy, it was very, very helpful, because everybody was at the table and stayed at the table. So I think your point is very well placed. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll be around probably till about 2 o'clock. And again, thank you for having me, and appreciate all of your dedicated effort here. Thank you.